You won't believe what you're about to see. In March 2025, Boeing, the iconic face of American aviation, made a stunning announcement that sent shockwaves through Washington. The company revealed it was shifting a multi-billion-dollar production contract to Canada, not Seattle, not St. Louis. Donald Trump erupted on Truth Social, accusing Ottawa of betraying American workers. But here's the real question. Who actually betrayed whom in this story? This entire chain of events traces back to 2024, when Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on imported aircraft components. He claimed the move would shield Boeing and protect thousands of jobs across Missouri, South Carolina, and Washington. The policy was sold as a way to bring manufacturing home and build a defensive wall around the U.S. aerospace industry. But the outcome unfolded in the exact opposite direction. Instead of strengthening Boeing, the tariffs fractured global supply chains, sent production costs soaring, and pushed the company into an astonishing contradiction. To survive under its own country's trade rules, Boeing had to look outside U.S. borders. And the destination wasn't Mexico, it wasn't Europe, it was Canada, the same neighbor Trump had previously brushed off as a weak trade partner. What actually happened behind the scenes is far from a minor agreement. The contract Boeing signed with Canadian partners is a massive production package worth billions. It includes assembly of next-generation fuselages, integration of advanced avionics systems, and long-term maintenance agreements extending all the way to 2035. And the locations aren't Everett, Washington, or North Charleston. They're Quebec and Ontario. The reasoning came down to cold, unforgiving math. After tariffs hit imported components in early 2024, the cost of building a commercial aircraft in the U.S. jumped between 12 and 18%. Parts sourced from Canada, Mexico, and Europe, the backbone of Boeing's supply chain, suddenly became painfully expensive. Producing in Canada, meanwhile, gave Boeing access to global markets without facing the very trade barriers Washington had created. What makes this even more ironic is that Boeing warned about this exact scenario months earlier. During congressional hearings in June 2024, CEO Dave Calhoun stressed that aviation is a global ecosystem. No single country, not even the United States, can supply the entire value chain alone, from titanium and aerospace-grade aluminum to flight control microchips. That warning went largely ignored. Now, Canadian firms like Bombardier C&E and MDA Corporation aren't just supplying parts. They're official manufacturing partners holding contracts American factories once viewed as their rightful inheritance. Montreal and Toronto, Canada's two aerospace hubs, are experiencing an unprecedented surge of investment. Ottawa has committed an additional 2.3 billion Canadian dollars to aviation research and development, creating at least 8,000 high-tech jobs over the next 3 years. Back in the U.S., the picture looks very different. Aviation unions in Seattle and St. Louis began receiving notices of reduced shifts. One Boeing engineer told the Seattle Times, "We're being asked to train our Canadian counterparts over video calls. They're learning to do our jobs using our own expertise." This stopped being just about tariffs or trade protection. It became a story about a policy so rigid it ended up hurting itself, and a global economy that isn't waiting for America to make up its mind. Trump's response was immediate and explosive. On Truth Social, he accused Ottawa of stabbing American workers in the back and threatened retaliatory measures. But, beneath all that tough rhetoric was a hard truth. His own tariff policies actually created the incentives that made Canada Boeing's most logical option. Canada's response, or really the lack of one, was equally revealing. The Prime Minister didn't call emergency press conferences or issue inflammatory statements. Ottawa simply welcomed the Boeing deal as a milestone for Canada's aerospace industry, emphasizing that the country can compete and win globally when treated fairly. That calm approach was deliberate. While Washington flip-flopped on tariff rules, creating uncertainty for businesses, Canada spent 2 years projecting the opposite image: stable, transparent, and predictable. Investors don't need the loudest environment. They need the safest one. Inside the United States, reactions grew more complicated. Aviation unions, once a core pillar of Trump's 2024 support, began turning away. The president of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers told CNN, "We were promised jobs. Now we're training Canadians to replace us. This isn't America first. This is America last." Democrats seized the moment. Senators from Washington and Missouri, home to Boeing's largest workforces, jointly condemned Trump's trade strategy, calling it one of the most serious economic and diplomatic failures of the decade. Even within the Republican Party, cracks appeared. Lawmakers from battleground states like Arizona and North Carolina worried that job losses could haunt them in the 2026 elections. While Washington argued internally, Ottawa moved quietly. Canada signed similar agreements with Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, sending a clear signal. Winning doesn't require noise, just patience while your competitor stumbles. In Renton, Washington, about 12 miles from Seattle, Boeing once powered the local economy. More than 60% of families had at least one member employed by the company. Today, coffee shops near the factory gates sit quiet at shift change. There simply aren't enough shifts anymore. James Holloway, a mechanical engineer with 22 years at Boeing, recalls receiving an email asking him to join a remote training program for technicians in Quebec. They called it international collaboration, he said. But I know what it really means. I'm training my replacement. His story isn't isolated. Over 200 Boeing workers across Washington and Missouri have been notified of reduced hours or transfers into lower-pay temporary roles. Meanwhile, north of the border, the situation couldn't be more different. In Montreal's St. Laurent industrial zone, hiring is booming. Technical schools have been asked to train 3,000 additional aerospace engineers over the next 3 years. Marie Blanchard, a 28-year-old engineer recently hired, shared, "I finished my master's last year and never imagined working on Boeing-scale projects so soon. Now companies are competing for talent. This feels like a once-in-a-generation moment." The shift extends beyond jobs. Entire supply chain ecosystems are moving. U.S. parts suppliers, logistics firms, and training institutions are watching revenues fall, while Canadian counterparts report double-digit growth. An MIT supply chain analyst explains, "This isn't just one contract. It's an industrial center of gravity shifting, and once that happens, it's extremely hard to reverse." Perhaps the most painful part isn't in the data, but in the sense of betrayal. A welder in South Carolina wrote on an internal forum, "They told us tariffs would protect our jobs. The jobs are still there, they just aren't ours anymore." This is where economic policy stops being abstract and becomes families, communities, and broken promises. So, what does the Boeing story really reveal? That credibility isn't built through slogans, but through consistency. That in a global economy, power belongs not to those who shout the loudest, but to those who earn trust. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, like and subscribe so you don't miss future stories about the global power game few people talk about honestly. And tell me, do you think this is the start of something bigger, or just a one-off event? Back in 2016, Donald Trump stood before Boeing workers in South Carolina and promised to bring manufacturing back to America. 9 years later, those same workers are training Canadians to take their place. The irony isn't that Canada won, it's that America built its own rival. While Washington focused on trade wars, Ottawa focused on stability. And in a world where stability has become the most valuable currency, the real question isn't, what is America first worth now? It's whether slogans can ever replace strategy.